Are you wondering what role nutrition plays in your chronic pain? Are you curious if sugar is really that bad for you? If so, you're in the right place. Because in this video, I'm going to break down all the ways in which sugar and carbohydrates can contribute to your chronic pain. And by the end, you're going to have a better understanding on how to treat your chronic pain yourself. You might be surprised when I tell you that sugar is actually one of the most dangerous things for any chronic pain sufferer for a multitude of reasons, and the first being your mitochondrial health. Now remember your mitochondria, little organelles found in almost all of your cells. They're responsible for creating ATP or energy. Now your mitochondria can produce energy from one of two sources, either fatty acids or glucose or sugar. When your mitochondria take its preferred fuel source, fatty acids plus oxygen, it spits out a nice 9 ATP. That's energy to help heal damaged tissues and clear inflammation. But if your mitochondria use its backup source because your diet is much higher in carbohydrates and sugar, a lot lower in fatty acids, you're only going to get 4 ATP per molecule of glucose. But that's not it. You're also going to get lactic acid. Lactic acid is the molecule that is released when you exercise. It makes you have that burning, aching sensation in your muscles. It's a bummer, but it's actually a really good thing. It's a signaling molecule to say, hey, come heal these damaged tissues and rebuild them stronger. But that only works if you're exercising. If you're suffering from chronic pain, you're getting all the lactic acid without any of the benefits. This is why a diet higher in fatty acids and lower in glucose and carbohydrates is typically the preferred diet for chronic pain sufferers. Now, most inflammation, especially chronic inflammation, actually begins in the gut, and sugar is one of the biggest culprits. In an acute hyperglycemic state, you are going to increase the amount of free radicals roaming around your body. These are little molecules that are constantly doing damage to healthy tissues, but also preventing damaged tissues from having a fighting chance in recovery. And it increases nuclear factor kappa beta, which is the prominent chronic inflammatory pathway. So acute hyperglycemia causes chronic inflammation. Now, what is an acute hyperglycemic state? This is just a single day of consuming 75 grams or more of combined sugar and carbohydrates. All right. Now, in chronic hyperglycemic states, so this is you are consuming 75 plus grams of carbs and sugar every day, you are now going to increase acute inflammatory pathways. So the cytokines tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukin 6 both get increased, but you're also going to create dysbiosis. That's the balance between the good bacteria and the bad bacteria in your body. Sugar feeds the bad bacteria, creating a more inflammatory state that is less likely to help heal damaged tissues, create neurotransmitters, digest your food, etc., etc. But a chronic hyperglycemic state also creates advanced glycation end products, which is something we're going to talk about later this week because it is such a big topic. One of the biggest lies that chronic pain sufferers are told is that their diet has no impact on their pain in the long run. This simply is not true, especially when it comes to consuming large amounts of sugar and carbohydrates. This can lead to insulin resistance, which no, is not just for diabetics. It can happen to anyone and still cause a lot of damage. Now, typically, your body hates it when glucose is just freely circulating. It wants it in the cells where it can do good and not do harm. But in order to get into the cells, you need insulin. Insulin pushes glucose into the cells. But if you're constantly consuming large amounts of carbs and sugar, your cells become insulin resistant, meaning they no longer care about that insulin and are not open to accepting more glucose. This insulin resistance now creates a bidirectional relationship between pain and inflammation, where pain causes inflammation, and inflammation in reverse creates pain. But insulin is also neurotropic, meaning it protects your nerves and helps them grow healthy. If you lose that ability, now you have peripheral nerve damage, spinal cord sensitization, which that's the central sensitization that we've been talking about all these weeks, and systemic inflammation. So a diet high in carbs and sugar is for the general population very unhealthy, but for most chronic pain sufferers is not the preferred diet. One of the most important things that any chronic pain sufferer should be aware of is their nutrition, especially how much sugar they're ingesting every day. Because too much sugar can create something called an advanced glycation end product. This is the process by which sugar actually binds to proteins and makes them ineffective, largely due to insulin resistance, which we talked about last video. But in order for a protein to work, it needs to bind to a receptor on the cell. And the shape of the protein dictates what receptor it binds to. But when sugar binds onto that protein, it changes its shape, and now that protein can no longer bind to the receptor. On top of this, your body actually does a really bad job of removing advanced glycation end products on its own. And they love to accumulate in neuromuscular tissue, namely bones, cartilage, muscles, tendons, ligaments, and nerves. So not only can these proteins not do their job and heal damaged tissues, but now they create excess damage and produce hyperalgesia. This is when what should cause a normal amount of pain now causes a lot of pain, or when something that shouldn't cause pain now starts to create pain, all because of sugar. Hopefully by now you're understanding how detrimental sugar really is for your chronic pain. But a few things we haven't talked about so far is that sugar is actually the main contributor to high blood pressure and plaquing in your arteries and veins. Both of these things reduce the amount of blood flow to your tissues. That means less nutrients and less oxygen. So that's less healing and more pain. Sugar is also a culprit of fatigue, which goes hand in hand with chronic pain and elevated cortisol levels. So if you're feeling stressed all the time, wired but tired, having trouble sleeping, could be elevated cortisol, most likely coming from your sugar intake. But sugar also flares autoimmune diseases, which contribute to chronic pain. These are not isolated systems, they interact very closely. And sugar also creates dysbiosis, which means the amount of good bacteria in your gut lowers and it feeds the amount of bad bacteria. And this doesn't just show up as GI complaints like gas, bloating, indigestion. It's poor nutrient absorption, it's poor inflammation clearance, and it's poor neurotransmitter synthesis, which are all required for getting out of chronic pain. So now that we better understand why sugar is so detrimental for your chronic pain, you now have to understand that carbohydrates do the exact same thing because all carbohydrates can get converted into glucose one way or the other in your body. Now, when we talk about carbohydrates, they come in mono, oligo, and polysaccharide forms. These first two are considered simple carbohydrates, which you've probably associated with being the bad carbs. Polysaccharides are complex carbs, which you probably associated with being the good carbs. Fortunately, it's not that simple, especially when it comes to chronic pain. Now, if we start with the monosaccharides, you got the obvious glucose, but then you also have fructose. Hey, comes from fruit. Must be healthier, right? Unfortunately, we love the vitamins and minerals that come from fruit, but the fructose will still do just as much damage in your body as glucose. Oligosaccharides, you have maltose, which comes from grains. This is just two glucose molecules bound together. Lactose comes from dairy. That's a galactose plus a glucose molecule bound together. Sucrose, this is table sugar. It's a fructose and, you guessed it, a glucose bound together. Now, the reason why we say simple carbs are so bad is because all of these get converted into glucose through gluconeogenesis in your body after you've consumed them. So, what makes complex carbs so much better? Well, they get converted into glycogen, which is the energy storage found in your muscles. When it's there, it can't cause any damage. But if you don't use it, it will also get converted into glucose through that same gluconeogenesis pathway. So if you're more sedentary because of your chronic pain, and especially if you're consuming more sugar and carbohydrates, all that safe glycogen now gets turned into harmful glucose, making complex carbs no longer safe for you, the chronic pain sufferer. So there you have it. Those are all the ways in which sugar and carbohydrates are contributing to your chronic pain. Now you'll have a better understanding on how to treat your chronic pain yourself.